And now I would like to hand over to the moderator for today's webinar, Dr. Diana Höjlund-Madsen.
I would also like to welcome all of you to this webinar, Gendered Effects of the Pandemic in Africa, Ways Forward. It's organized by the Nordic Africa Institute. My name is Diana Höjlund-Madsen. I'm a senior researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute. At this International Women's Day, we will discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected women and girls in Africa, particularly in Ghana, South Africa, and Uganda. And we will also discuss the gender needs in a post-pandemic scenario and phase of recovery, looking back, but also thinking ahead. And we have three experts who will present their perspective from different angles and contexts. I should say that it is organized in this way that the three presenters will have each 15 minutes, and after each presenter, we will have questions and answers which you can put into the Q&A. So I will encourage you to immediately start posing your questions there so that they will be available for the first speaker. And now I will hand over to the head of the research unit, Elena Fischer, for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Diana. A warm welcome, everyone, to this webinar, which we are hosting at the Nordic Africa Institute as one of many events that mark our 60th anniversary year. And of course, coming together to celebrate International Women's Day, raising awareness of the importance of gender equality and to celebrate the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women, reflecting especially this year's theme of imagining a gender equal world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination. As we are all aware, I suspect, of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has accentuated gender inequalities and impacted negatively on women's lives, this is manifest in many different ways across the African continent. It'd be all too easy for us to sit here and repeat simple stereotypes. But for me, the context-specific manifestations of COVID-19 and how it has impacted on the lives of women and girls, men and boys, demands that we have a proper conversation based on full research, which has been so difficult to do during the pandemic disruption. This, I hope, will enable us to look ahead in terms of action. And if I return to the fact that we are here on International Women's Day, to ask, is there grounds for optimism looking ahead? On that note, we're very privileged to be joined by three speakers with deep insight into these issues based on their current research. Professor Amanda Howes, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa, where she holds a chair in gender politics. Amanda has published a collection of COVID diaries, women's experience of the pandemic, with Olivia Eziobi, and we'll be speaking today about the expanding of care work women have experienced as a consequence of the COVID pandemic and its implications for feminist ethics of care. Dr. Irene Apping-Addo is Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. Her research focuses on African urbanisms and housing studies, but today she will present her research from a paper co-authored with colleagues on surviving COVID-19 and remaining productive, the lived experience of women academics at the University of Ghana, which touches a note quite close to my heart there. And finally, Dr. Viola Nailila Nyakato, Senior Lecturer at Mbarara University of Science and Technology and Founding Dean of the Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies, also who has joined us at the Nordic Africa Institute for a year. Viola has been working on sexual and reproductive health and rights in the era of the pandemic, which she will speak about today. She is also author of a recent policy brief on sexual and gender-based violence, which is produced at the Nordic Africa Institute. On that note, I will hand back over to Diana to moderate the session. Thank you, Diana.
Okay, thank you. And we will start with Amanda, who will present her work in around 15 minutes. And unfortunately, Amanda will have to leave us. So therefore, I really encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A, and then I will select them and make sure to bring them forward to Amanda during this session. Please, Amanda, the word is yours.
I'm just going to share my screen now. Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank the Nordic Africa Institute for the opportunity to present. And I apologize that I need to leave early, but I need to chair another International Women's Day event. So Diana, let me just go back there. I seem not to be able to move my slides. Wait, let's go to I can't get to, yeah. Can you just do the full screen for me, please, from the beginning? Thank you. So Diana mentioned the book that we put together, my colleague Olivia Esiobi and I. Next slide. That is the cover of the book. We put the swashway masks on the cover because at that time it was in the very serious lockdown in South Africa, and we all had to wear masks, and we felt that the swashway African masks would be good for the cover of the book. Next slide. So this book originated from women's frustrations because of online surveys. At that time, we got all kinds of surveys. Most of us are academics, to try and capture what was happening to women. And many of these surveys were designed by men. So they would ask you, how many children do you have? They did not bother to ask if you don't have children. They did not ask questions about women's realities. And so Olivia called me one morning and she was really upset. And I said to her, why don't we do our project? Why we do a feminist project on women's experience? So this was a creative writing project where women just told their stories. And we received 35 essays, and they were actually beautifully crafted from women across all walks of life. But the golden thread that runs through this book is the explosion of care work that women had to take on board for family members, for small children, and they also had to do homeschooling if children were in school, help the kids with homeschooling, care for people's mental health, and those who became sick with COVID without support structures, because now we were isolated in our homes. So that, I think, the whole issue of care is a very important issue that runs through the book. And we know, if we talk about feminist care ethics, that unless conditions are conducive to care, so that we can actually have attentiveness, responsiveness, and responsibility for the care, it becomes really very difficult to have a care ethic. And the care ethics was really challenged in these very confined conditions. But women also had to deal with life-threatening consequences of poverty, because a lot of women lost their jobs. And we know how many women in Africa are part of the informal economy, those who sell their crafts and fruit and stuff on the street. And South Africa has a very large informal economy. So those women were really hit very hard because they didn't have a lot of reserves. And we were in, as you know, nearly 2 years that we've been in lockdown. So that also led to all kinds of mental health problems, especially for those people who live alone and who have nobody that could be a support structure or somebody that they could actually talk to. So depression was also a big story in this book. But I want to read you just a few paragraphs from Olivia Esihobi, who's the co-editor's essay. The essay was a room of your own, sort of playing on Virginia Woolf idea of a room of your own. The tension between working from home and being a mother has been the biggest source of stress for me during the state-sanctioned lockdown. She has, at that time, a 2-year-old toddler. I wanted to work, truly and honestly, I wanted to work. However, when I sat down in front of my laptop, he wanted to sit on my lap and type on the laptop as well. When I tried to read, he wanted to see what I was reading, or he wanted to take my reading material and draw. My husband was also at home, as his place of employment was also closed. He was more than happy to spend time with our boy so I could work. But if I was home, our boy wanted his mother's attention. He played with Daddy for a little while, but then he came looking for me, to sit on my lap, to show me things, to ask me questions, to cuddle with me. There were days I sat in my car to grade essays because I could not do it in my home. And I could not go to a coffee shop or a restaurant because none were open. The university where I worked was closed and staff had no access to their offices. I literally had nowhere to work aside from in my car. Now, this is a story, of course, for those of us who are privileged at the time to have jobs that could actually, and have cars, so we could sit in our cars. But for many people, you know, the homelessness in South Africa also exploded. And these days, if you drive through Cape Town, where I live, for example, you will see makeshift shelters on the sidewalks, in alleys, everywhere. So homelessness have increased tremendously. Next slide. So what the book also shows at that is that people started to think about the consequences of human behavior for the planet, because these are zoonotic viruses, of which COVID is one. So viruses that jump from animals to humans is a cause, a consequence of our neglect of the planet and our really huge carbon footprint for those of us who travel regularly. So people started to imagine a different type of being in the world. This came out in the stories. People, and mainly academics, also started to think about being forced into the digital world through non-stop online teaching. And here we are today in the digital world. So it's also thinking through Donna Haraway's notion of the cyborg, how humans and machines got merged or are being merged with each other, and that we can actually not get along in terms of what we do without being connected in cyberspace in one way or another. Next slide. So thinking then broader than mainly the book, the gender defects in Africa. 92% of women in Africa are in the informal economy, and it stopped, as I've already said, when COVID started. But girls also lost important educational opportunities because they carried the burden of care work. And women bore the brunt of the pandemic. In Egypt, 92% of essential workers were women, while the medical leadership was dominated by men. And many frontline women workers died of COVID. In Kenya, Ethiopia, Cameroon, and Uganda, women, for example, used initiative and started making masks that they could use for essential work, but also to sell. But we also saw a very serious increase in sexual violence, women locked down with perpetrators with nowhere to go and in social isolation. So here, I think one of the important things that became very clear is that more women are needed in decision-making positions. Because if we see how the COVID pandemic was managed, many women who actually were also in COVID in decision-making positions were, if we talk about the global north, for example, not asked about their opinions about the pandemic, not asked about their research. It was mainly men that we saw on television in the beginning of the pandemic. But if we talk about the African context, here, you know, women are very often excluded from the decision-making position. So we really need to think about how to improve the positions of women's leadership. Next slide. Coming back to South Africa, so we need to also understand the economic effects in South Africa. Women are already in lower paid jobs than men, and their positions are more precarious than men. So pre-pandemic, they were already in precarious positions. And they were the ones who lost their jobs first. Those who were on contract, or if they were domestic workers, they had to go home. So the precariousness of these types of jobs really had a very serious impact on women. The norm in South Africa is single women households with children. And these households were hit very hard because of the fact that the single women with no other income, and then when that income stopped, they had kids to feed that they couldn't feed. The hardest hit sectors were manufacturing, so factory workers, hospitality, and private care, like domestic work, where women are concentrated, and these all came to a standstill. Women's wages and household consumption dropped by as much as 20%. And the poverty rate for women-headed households are 50 to 55% higher than for male-headed households. So what needs to be done here is that there needs to be financial aid provided by government, but also training for women to do other types of jobs. Otherwise, the spiral of poverty will indeed just continue. Next slide. So what we saw is that gender-based violence in the South African context increased under the lockdown, but we at first thought it decreased because the statistics came down. But the reason why the statistics came down was because women couldn't report the abuse. And for those of you, I guess, who know the statistic, is that South Africa is one country with one of the highest sexual violence rates and intimate femicide in the world. I mean, we have between 40 to 60,000 reported rapes per year. And if we look at the research of NGOs, the argument is that only 1 in 9 rapes get reported. So that means we have close to 1 million rapes per year. So when the lockdown levels dropped, it was clear that women was fighting another pandemic, the pandemic of sexual violence. So this was the first time our president had every 2 weeks, he had a family meeting that he spoke to us on television. And this was the first time that he actually spoke on a public platform about gender-based violence and how this cannot continue. So when the lockdown levels dropped, the visibility of gender-based violence increased. And what we are asking now is that before lockdown, we had hashtag total shutdown in 2018. So that was a mass movement to actually get government to intervene in the very high levels of gender-based violence. And at that time, the government then had provincial consultations on a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and intimate femicide. But that plan was, the implementation of that plan was actually stopped when the pandemic started and we went into lockdown. So the demand now is that this national strategic plan need to be implemented. This will make victim empowerment processes more clear. We want more Tutuzela care centers, for example, at police stations. Those will be one-stop centers where women can report, can get counseling and get a rape kit done. We want more funding for shelters for domestic violence, and we want also the improvement of forensic processes, because there are thousands of DNA samples that's just not being processed. So all of this will be made easier by the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. The issue now is the implementation of the plan. And then I think in terms of the way forward, apart from dealing with gender-based violence and funding for and training for women, in the South African context, we've talked for a long time about the need for a basic income grant. This would mean that people who earn below a certain level will be able to get a grant. We're talking here about 350 Rand per person per month from government to sustain them. And if families pool the money, then at least they have a livable income that they can use to sustain themselves. But I think what the COVID pandemic clearly points out to us is the dire need of people who live close to the breadline, close to the poverty line, or below the poverty line. And in the South African case, it's nearly 45% of our population. So people in those conditions really suffered. They suffered from hunger, they suffered from isolation, they suffered from violence. And the pandemic actually put a looking glass on these conditions that I think post-pandemic now, the government really need to think very seriously. And also women's movements, women's organizations are deeply involved in trying to find solutions for these conditions. I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Okay, I can see that we have 2 questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to read those for you, Amanda. The first one is, how did women cope up with the explosion of care work? In your opinion, which positive coping strategies done by these women could be encouraged to be replicated elsewhere in coping to COVID-19?
Well, I think that you know, in the isolation of lockdown, the level 5 and level 4, it was very difficult. But when we went down to lower levels, women sort of came together and they tried to at least outsource, or not outsource, but get each other involved in caring for smaller children. And then also they tried to find ways of getting one person or a person with skills to be involved in the homeschooling, helping kids for homeschooling. So they would, and this was also very difficult because of the fact that in the poorer areas and in the rural areas, women are not online. They don't have computers. They don't have access to the online world. But where they were access, women would try to get one person with skills to help with the home care homeschooling and also with homework. So those were two of the strategies I think that women who were in dire need to use. I think in the middle class, of course, people had other coping strategies and started, play groups for children, but you need transport for doing that. So in the middle class, people have transport. And they have online access, and they also use skills of people who could actually be involved in homeschooling and in for example, math education. Math's not everybody's strong point, so for that, those were some of the strategies. But I think in the hard lockdown, it was really very difficult.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and also thank you for your very comprehensive overview you presented about the situation in South Africa. I will take a few more questions. There's one question here about was obtaining the data for the book easy? Was the gender data readily available? I think that's also a very interesting question to reflect upon, also especially in this context where we can think about what are really the needs for research in this area.
Yeah, so when we started, Olivia and I started with this book, we were in lockdown 4, so that was still hard lockdown. So we put out a call, online call, starting with, people at university, but then sending it on some of our networks and distribution lists wider. And we also wanted people who were not academics in the book. But it was amazing how fast people responded and how people really had a need to tell their stories. And I think this is what made the book so interesting, is that people were very, candid about their experiences. There's one story about mental health issues. That's a raw in how it was written, but it was so poignant when you read it. There's another story of a woman whose mother committed suicide during the pandemic. Also a story that's really, it hits you very hard when you read that. So it was I think in a sense, the book also served the purpose of giving people a form of therapy, or it was therapeutic for them to write their stories. But this is not academic research, right? But I think what Olivia and I have done with the book is to tease out the common threads. And the common threads really was the care issues, the mental health issues, and poverty issues. There's a story that the mother tells in the book, how she says that there was nothing that she could use for soup anymore. So she would boil water and she would pepper and salt in the water. And that was it. And you read it and you think, this is such dire situations, and people had to live through that.
Mm. Yeah, we have a few more questions. There's one here: who cares for the carers? Does anyone care about women, or are they believed to be able to cope? Somehow it links to the question you have already answered, but perhaps a bit more specific.
Well, I think this is exactly the issue, that care is not valued, and that care is not considered a dimension of citizenship. Right? So if we think about citizenship, care work is not contained in the conceptualizations that we use. So when women's care increase, it seems that the thinking is that women just have to absorb it. That's what women do, so they have to absorb this. And we see that the conditions for really a feminist ethics of care became very difficult, because women were overburdened, they were overwhelmed. And then you asked the very important question, who cares for the carers? And this is why we see that for women to write chapters in this book was about saying, we don't have support structures, and of course there are women who write that their husbands were supportive. But like Olivia said, that, when she was her little boy just wanted to be with her, even though his father was there. So it's that thing of social isolation, that you cannot now go somewhere else to do your work. And I think that really complicated the situation. But also, if we looked at the essential workers, there were many online videos, YouTube videos, just showing the sheer exhaustion of the people working with people who came in very ill, people who were dying, people who died, and the trauma of that. And there was very little time for them to deal with that trauma. So I think we're still going to see post-traumatic stress of essential care workers in the aftermath of the pandemic.
Yes, there's a lot of questions for you, Amanda. I think I will just take one more. There's one here. I wonder whether there was a response by political decision makers or civil society, and what strategies were adopted to address it in the South African context.
Well, I think that, if we look at community-based organizations, what they did, especially where people were poor, is to come together and start like soup kitchens. So they would use their resources, they would put their resources together, and they would actually then on a daily basis feed people that live in that specific community. And here there was a very interesting situation with, the Cape Flats around Cape Town. There are a lot of gangs operating and gang violence, and the gangs stopped the violence, and the gangs actually contributed to the soup kitchen. So that was really something quite interesting. So there were grants given by government, the care grants, they were called care grants, for 300 Rand per person per month. And those still continuing now because we're not out of the aftermath of the pandemic yet, but that helped at least those who actually applied for it. And there was a lot of problems with the administration of the grants. But 18 million people received the care grants during, so that helped. But it was also communities coming together and caring for each other. And I think that was quite amazing in the South African context.
Yeah, I think I myself will ask you the last question, which was, I wonder how this book has been received in South Africa, and then I will encourage you, Amanda, to respond to the other questions in the Q&A in writing.
Thanks, I will do that. So the book, we had a couple of launches when we went down to a lower lockdown. And the book has, the first print run was sold out. And then we went into a second print run, and that's nearly sold out. So the book is really, in the South African context, it's selling well and people are reading it. It's actually, but unfortunately, the online distribution has been very difficult. And this is a consequence of this, the Imbali Press, the publisher is a women's publisher. So a small publisher, and we wanted to work with a women's publisher, and they actually went under because of COVID. So the contracts that they entered into for online then is, there are now a lot of administrative and financial issues around that. But if people want copies, they can email me, can get my address from Diana. And yeah, I still have copies that I can sell. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda. I will hand over to Irene Epening-Addo, who will present her work from Ghana. Irene, are you with us still?
Yes, I am.
Okay, excellent. Please start.
Can I keep my video of my internet is quite stable?
Yeah, that will be fine, Irene. I think you had some PowerPoints you wanted to share as well. Irene, are you still there? I think, Irene, will you be able to share your PowerPoints? Okay, here they are.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm trying to put it in PowerPoint mode, but my internet is quite unstable. Do you hear me speak? Can you confirm that you hear me speak?
Yes, we hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So my presentation is titled Surviving COVID-19 and Remaining Productive, the Lived Experiences of Women Academics at the University of Ghana. So this paper highlights the agency, care decisions, adaptive and coping strategies of women academics at the University of Ghana between March 2020 and March 2021, as they navigated the academic and non-academic spaces of their lives, whilst striving to remain productive in an inherently male-centered and male-dominated work sector. So Becky assessed that COVID-19 has dramatically increased women's care burdens because of lockdowns, school closures, strict physical distancing, and high levels of morbidity and mortality. And resource limitations for academic work, sociocultural demands on women, and high teaching workloads have complicated the ability of African-based female academics to thrive, achieve their career goals in an inherently male-dominated sector. So Chikata and others claim that African women academics have been recognized for their agency and resilience in handling difficult situations. Generally, the global pandemic associated with quarantines, contact tracing, lockdowns, physical distancing, and school closures have rendered homes the locus for increased family caregiving for most women. So the University of Ghana is one of the most prominent institutions of higher education in Ghana. It has positioned itself to be seen as the beacon of hope and prosperity for many individuals. Yet, it is impacted by the gendered nature of society and the academy in general. Currently, women faculty make up only 26% of all teaching and research staff, which is very low. And Chikata in 2007 noted that it was 20% of the faculty. So gender parity still exists, with only 9 out of 366 women faculty being full professors during the time of study. So the institutional culture's failure to distinguish between male and female academics, and a firm belief that this was the correct approach, has compounded the woes of women academics. When COVID-19 was first reported in Ghana, the University of Ghana responded swiftly by following the directive to close all educational institutions. The safety of faculty, staff, and students was prioritized by the university through the institution of rigid COVID-19 protocols. Unfortunately, the university had a laser focus on ensuring that teaching and learning continued without disruption during the crisis, leaving voids in other critical areas of the university. So one thing I want us to bear in mind that African family systems are transforming, and they are undergoing rapid changes characterized by urbanization, longer years spent in education and training for females, and employment outside the home, which is leading to the weakening of lineage bonds of support and care for families. Marriages have also become more nuclearized. Obligations towards kinship groups have declined, and the traditional involvement of the matriarch in caring roles is fast eroding. Despite the changes in kinship support, popular culture still homogenizes and characterizes an ideal woman as a natural, committed, faithful, and effective nurturer of the species who embraces domesticity, cooks for her family, and sees to the efficient and seamless management of her home. So with COVID-19 domesticating women academics as they work from home, their likelihood of fully resuming their traditional mandate and performing normative femininity is high. At the same time, the requirements of academia take no cognizance of women's increased care burden during the pandemic. This is because mothering, other mothering, and community mothering, as Wayne indicated, are rooted in the African philosophy that children belong to their biological parents. In reference to COVID-19 responses and women's increased care burden, Ranike argues that how a crisis is managed has both material and ethical issues. So she calls for a feminist logic of crisis that takes note of and accounts for women's care provisioning to sustain human connections and keep everyone in the way. So in this paper, we analyze the gender roles played by female academics and how these roles deepen their career vulnerabilities in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. We use Zoom to virtually interview and hold in-depth meetings and focus group discussions with 15 women academics in 2 colleges, the College of Basic and Applied Sciences and the College of Humanities, between 21st April and 4th May 2021. The respondents were purposefully sampled from these 2 colleges because of the differences in teaching and research experiences, as well as the number of undergraduate and graduate students that they handle. The women shared, yes.
I wanted to let you know that we can only see the first slide, so I don't know.
Yes, that's okay. That's okay. I can't scroll through the others, so that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So after transcribing and analyzing the information, 2 broad themes emerged, and that is mothering and care responsibilities of the female academics during the pandemic, and academic work stresses, adjustment, and coping strategies. So mothering and care responsibilities of the women. When the lockdown was instituted in the 2 big cities in Ghana, that is in Accra and Kumasi, the initial reaction of the women academics was to rest after combining administrative duties with teaching, research, and supervision. Others were experiencing health challenges. And so the lockdown provided an opportunity to recuperate and de-stress. The lives of many of the women interviewed had been overstretched over the semester, thus affecting their productivity. They discovered that the initial lockdown allowed them to deepen and explore familial relations whilst they spent time with their families, cooking and engaging in sports and games. They believed the family dynamics had changed and there was increased bonding. And this finding is synonymous with literature that reported an increase in family bonding. So the benefits of reconnecting as a family was highlighted among most of the respondents. However, this perceived benefit was eroded when women academics were confronted with mothering and care responsibilities at home and outside home. The initial uncertainties associated with COVID-19 created a lot of panic among the women academics at the university. They were receiving information from all forms of media. So the social media, the radio, the television, even from their social networks. And some of the key messages were to stay at home as much as possible, to keep safe physical distance, to eat well, to boost your immune system. And these messages compel the women to take certain decisions to ensure that the members of their household were safe. Thus, they were cooking for the family regularly, providing homeschooling for their primary and secondary school children, engaging in regular exercises, shopping, and caring for aged parents. All these activities engaged most of their time and energy, and so much that it began to impact their research and writing. They also share stories about prioritizing their husband's work over their own at the beginning of the pandemic. This translated to the women academics taking a backseat to everything and everyone. Ordinarily, these women would spend most of their workday in the office. Suddenly, they were faced with familial expectations that dictated how they perform most of their domestic responsibilities. For example, a respondent who is married to a pastor recognized her role as a wife and mother to be paramount to her identity as a woman. She would spend most of her day caring for their children, whilst her husband would spend most of their workday in their joint study, revising strategies to reach his congregation. However, she soon realized that her teaching, research, and writing were lagging behind. So she devised a strategy to carve out time for her academic work. She timed her work to coincide with when her husband was taking a midday break. Others recounted the mental stress they had to deal with during the latter part of the lockdown, because they found themselves constantly cooking for the family. And for single mothers, it was stressful when they were confronted with sudden family illnesses while trying to handle academic responsibilities. Eventually, she had to fall upon her social networks to cater for her child while she attended to the extended family. Generally, our research showed that the women academics perform multi-mothering duties during the COVID, which also introduced a lot of strain on their financial, social, physical, and emotional health. Even though most of them were married and lived with their husbands, they felt obliged to cook their 3 meals a day to ensure the health of their family and stock the pantries of their mothers, aunts, church members, and other needy community members. Familial responsibilities among women were not different when we looked at across the two colleges. Similarly, the non-Ghanaians among us was also similar to their Ghanaian colleagues. Homeschooling placed several burdens on women who suddenly became mothers and teachers. This burden impacted their ability to be fully present in the office beyond the afternoons, and some of their male colleagues misunderstood their actions, suggesting that they were not being productive at work during the time required for research and team collaboration. So the triple burden of homeschooling, extended family caregiving, and academic responsibilities impacted women with young children greatly. In addition to these familiar, yes.
I will have to ask you to kind of round up now.
Yes, I'm about to end. So in addition to these familiar responsibilities, the women participated in other mothering and community mothering. So one coping strategy they adopted was to participate in online social groups. For example, a group was formed by the women at the Institute where they participated and shared their daily experiences. So in conclusion, our research revealed that the COVID came to compound the already existing gender-based inequality and systemic inadequacies at the university. The lack of cognizance of the gender differentials in the institutional response to the management of COVID was apparent in the data. The gender nature of the Ghanaian culture both supported the community and burdened women faculty and administrators at in the university. The lived experiences of women in the study varied on their position at the university and their role in religious institutions, as well as other non-UG organizations. So the post-lockdown period brought some respite from consistent domestic duties for women academics, but it also introduced tensions in the academic space as women who had school-age children had to leave for work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irene, for this insights into the situation of Ghanaian academics. I will encourage the audience and to ask some questions in the Q&A function. And I would also like to promote that Irene, together with her colleague, this is insights from an article that will be out in the journal Feminist Africa in June this year. So you will be able to read in full length her paper. I see that there's one question here. What could be done to address these systemic gender inequalities so that women no longer need to adjust their agendas to their husbands in order to cope? From Carleen Hulshoff. What is your take on this, Irene?
What could be done to address these systemic gender inequalities so that women no longer need to adjust their agendas to their husbands in order to cope? So we have been discussing this issue. We have been having conversations around it. And we think that, for example, when you take the issue of promotions in the university, it's just general. Both men and female are supposed to present a certain number of papers, are supposed to have a certain requirements before they could be promoted. And we have argued, we've started the argument and saying that women have additional duties or additional work beyond the University of Ghana. And so we cannot have the same promotion systems. So that is what we are talking about in terms of promotions in the university, and husbands adjusting and then also encouraging husbands. So, well, husbands were already helping their wives at home, but then they did not have the additional responsibilities of taking care of the extended family when they were sick and all that. So we feel that husbands should be more involved in supporting their wives.
Okay, you are breaking up a little bit in the end, but I think we got the key message. We have another question here. Could one argue that COVID demonstrated that the progressive shift in gender attitudes was due to a shift in circumstances rather than a shift in mindset? Because once COVID hit, the idea of women being domesticated returned. What would be your feedback to this participant?
Yes, I do agree. I do agree that it's already existing, being a woman, because even when we interview the women, they still they felt that their identity as a woman, as a mother, as a wife should, I mean, it predominated all their discussions and all their responses. But then their problem or their issue was that the incidence of COVID-19 and being at home, staying at home constantly, deepened that conception that as a woman, you need to be the one to care for the family, you need to be the one to care for the children, you need to be the one to care for the community and all that. And we had 3 female pastors, so pastors' wives, who shared their experiences. It wasn't just about caring for their family. Being pastor's wife, they were also regarded as mothers for the church. So members of the church were coming to them, talking to them and seeking advices. People were bringing their challenges. And then being a female academic with a bit of prestige around you, definitely in terms of financial issues, people in the community were coming to you, asking you to help them and support them. So the community mothering really was what burdened them a lot more. So that is what I can add to the discussion.
Yeah, we have a few more questions. We have one here. What role does culture play in the progress of women in the workplace?
Yes, and that is what we noticed, because the university setup itself has this patriarchal underpinnings. So most of the policies in the case of University of Ghana were underpinned by progresses that were not gender that were gender neutral, supposed to be gender neutral. And so when you talk of responsibilities in a university, it's like everyone should be involved in one way or the other. It doesn't really matter whether you are a female or a male or whatever. Yes, we appreciated that, but then we also felt that some of the responsibilities, a lot of the responsibilities were given to us as female academics. So we were supposed to be the mothers for the students. We were supposed to be the women are noted to be better organizers and all that. And so all the work responsibilities, committees and everything, we found ourselves involved and handling that, in addition to our duties or our domestic responsibilities, and then our career activities. So these were some of the things that were quite frustrating for us as women academics in the university.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can appreciate that. I can see in the Q&A that your colleague wants you to expand a bit on this notion of community mothering, which I also find quite interesting. Would you say a few more words about that?
Okay, yes. So thank you, Injiba. So the community mothering is something that is so key. So first of all, as I mentioned already, you are to mother. I mean, we are mothers. And when we deal with our students, they feel that you are mothers. So whilst, for example, they would address a male professor as a professor, they would address a female professor as auntie. So we have auntie somebody, auntie that, and all that. So there was that connection, that motherly connection there. Then when you talk about the family, you being one that it has reached a certain level, they would also require that you support the family the extended family, both the extended family and then your immediate family, they would expect you to be the one to handle affairs. And then talking about our communities, talking about our church, talking about our social groups and all that, you are expected to be the family. So you are looked at, you are looked at as the mother figure within the bigger community. Maybe that's just what I would add.
Yes, thank you very much, Irene. I will hand over to our last presenter, Viola Nyakato. Please, Viola, the word is yours. And I know that you also want to share some slides with us. Viola, you're on mute.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, and I want to thank my my colleagues who have just finished their presentation and to come and present about the threats that COVID-19 had on young girls. Yes, we have heard about women, and now we're talking about the young girls that that have been threatened by COVID-19. Hopefully you can see my screen.
We cannot see your slide, actually. It says that it has started screen sharing, but it's not yet there.
Let me try again.
Yes. Okay, here it is.
It is. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we're seeing it now.
Okay, I'm going to focus my talk on the threats that COVID-19 had on young people in Uganda, but specifically looking at the young girls. I have been introduced. I come from Uganda, and I'm going to bring the experiences of Uganda in this presentation. I want to start by talking about briefly about gender and the understanding of gender. In Uganda, most of the times when I'm in class talking about gender, you see the understanding of gender is really is difficult because we tend to think that when we talk about gender, we are actually talking about women. We are not talking about society. And it brings me to my experience on when I started to realize and the reality of if boys and girls are actually different. And for me, this is important because I came to really passionately realize that boys and girls are different socially. When I was already at the university, that shows you that we go through different stages and different experiences when it comes to the realities of social inequality or gender inequality. And for me, my experience was around my friend was being beaten by the boyfriend, and they just had a child at the university, and this girl was in first year, and my friend, the boyfriend, was in third year doing medicine. So that tells you that the experience that we get when it comes to gender is rooted. And one would ask, why did you come up to the university and don't realize that that men and women are different? It takes me back to family and the family protection and that you get when you're growing up. So I'm going to talk about the different experiences or how gender has threatened the young girls. I don't know why my screen is not moving. I'll stop sharing. If you can give me. Okay.
Camilla, can you help with the slides, please?
I'm going to approve Camilla to help with the slides. Is that fine with you, Camilla, now?
Yes, I'm just trying to change it for you.
Okay. Okay, I think now it is clear. Thank you very much. And as I talk about gender and the importance of contextualizing gender and its understanding, I think we need to be reminded that when we are talking about gender, as a sociologist, I'm thinking about social order. I'm thinking about the roles and the definition of roles which we are given, because society has to have particular order within which things are done, responsibilities are shared. And for that matter, it's something that we take for granted, like we have seen, and unless you have that experience, like you've seen in the previous presentations, sometimes it is taken for granted. So we see that the way society is put and the way we are addressed in terms of our roles is something that later defines and also our vulnerability, our opportunities, and for me, sometimes it's something that people take for granted. And even when we ask questions like why can't men help? How do they come here? So so defining gender and roles per se is not a problem, but the problem is that when these roles subject one gender to injustice, subject one gender to exclusion, subject one gender to abuse. And that's what I'm going to be talking about this morning. The experiences of young people when it came to COVID-19, young girls when it came to COVID-19, because of them being girls and in the society that they live in. So in Uganda, we have the youngest population, where we have almost more than half our population within the age group that is dependent, the age group of young people below 18 years. Our median age is 16 years, and 25% is a childbearing age group, because and also over 15 million children will go to school. I have to say that in Uganda, the first entry into school, actually, boys and girls have almost equal opportunity for most communities that you find they will equally enter into school. And before the lockdown, it was believed that 90% of all young people had actually enrolled in primary school. Unfortunately, completion of primary school is so low at 50, it is estimated only 50% of the children who enroll for primary school at around the age of 3 will complete the first 7 years of education. And on the minimum, for some communities, even it goes as low as 30%. And the advantage of education that I'm going to highlight is that the more years one spends in school improves their employability and the chances to get employed and enter into the employment sector. It is employability for after secondary school for both men and women is high. For women estimated at around 73%, and for men estimated at 92%. The differences are there, but you see, the more someone stays in school, the employability improves. So that is the context and the background within which we are going to have these issues. Next slide, Camilla. Okay. Yeah, the cultural context that I'm talking about is that we still have a very high traces of son preference. Having a boy child in a family, in a marriage is very important. So families which don't have sons remain unfulfilled, and they will continue looking out for sons. Girls' sexuality is actually controlled more than that of boys. and restricted premarital sex is among the girls. It's a lot of irresponsible. It is looked at as irresponsible behavior if a girl engages in premarital sex. And pregnancy brought before marriage continues to bring shame on the family and especially for the girls. And the fear is that if the girl gets pregnant or is suspected to have had sex before marriage, it affects the family's capacity to negotiate for better, higher bride price. And across most of the cultures, bride price is how many cows. It is weighed in the number of cows that one gets. You can see our beautiful long-horned cows in the picture that I have displayed here. So, and as well, culture and religion prohibits sexuality education, sexual and reproductive health talk. So culturally, sex education is restricted for marriage preparation. We have had a long culture of girls being prepared and told about how to behave, who to become, how to become mothers, how to become women, and how to care for their husbands. And when we look at what Irene was saying, this message come as early as in childhood, preparing your mind and your aspiration that you have to care for your family, you have to mother your family, you have to care for your husband. So these messages are given and prepared girls. So the limitation of sexuality education, sexual and reproductive health is for preparation for marriage, not necessarily for protection and learning about body changes and growth. So gender roles are learned as early as childhood. And recently, when it was lockdown, I came into the reality with our curriculum, which I also went through. And someone was teaching my daughter and other children whom we were collecting together to learn. And the teacher was telling the children the roles of parents, the roles of members of the family, and said, the father is the head of the family. The father is the protector. The father is the provider. And we are living in the reality where men and women bring resources into the home. So the gender roles are ingrained from family, from community, from religious settings. So gender roles are learned as early as childhood. So they are part of us, they are part of men, they are part of women. So that is the cultural context within which we are talking about. We are going to talk about the challenges that have been faced by girls during COVID-19. Next slide, Camilla. So how has COVID-19 threatened young people when it comes to girls? Of course, we are already on record as Uganda that we had the longest school closure. We are missing just about 1 month and a half to give a total of 2 years. So during the closure due to COVID-19, many children lost their education. The government attempted to provide resources for home learning, printed materials, radio program, TV programs, but these were accessed by very few people. Not many people accessed them. So as a result, it is estimated by January 2022, it was estimated by the government records that over 30%, estimated to be around 4 million children who were in school before closure, before lockdown, will never come back to school. So they will never come back to school again. And also during the lockdown, we have experienced high rates of teenage pregnancy, and the record among the very young adolescents, the 10 to 14-year-olds, increased in many instances, in many areas, staggering 336%. And this is something that would have been controlled if these young people were in school. So you see a very shoot up to over 300% in teenage pregnancy. High experience of early marriage. Parents went struggling to ensure that their children get married, their girls get married, in fear that they would get pregnant. And instead of getting pregnant when they're out of school, they would rather be married so that it doesn't take away the family honor. And so getting married, forcing girls to get married was one of the precautions or a measure that family put in place to ensure that they don't get shame on them when their girls get pregnant at home. And there are many things that happened that because parents who were working in the informal sector, they went to work, mothers went to work, fathers went to work. And in another study that we had, there was increased gender-based violence in families. So this could have increased the children's risk for pregnancy. And as well, there was loss of hope for going back to school because the government would announce in 3 months we shall open, next month we shall open, and there was loss for hope for school, and as a result, girls were instead married off instead of getting challenges with pregnancy, and also there was a lot of information about girls getting pregnant, girls being on the loose and having sex. So there was that tension that the option was to get married. In the picture on the right, those are some of the figures of the records of pregnancies that were recorded, and this is a fact sheet from the UNFPA, and that was recorded was captured by the local newspaper. Sexual exploitation, gender-based violence, female genital mutilation, sexual and reproductive health risks like HIV/AIDS infection, sexually transmitted infections, failure to access maternal health services, all those befell the young people in Uganda. Next slide, please. Okay, and most important for my talk this morning and being a Women's Day is that how is this situation, how is it affecting, how is it threatening school re-entry, and what is happening in schools? Is there opportunity for these girls who have been pregnant, these teenagers who are pregnant, these teenagers who are parenting? Do they have an opportunity to come back to school? Actually, no. On the opposite, on the right side, the newspaper caption shows a teenage mother. We were in the community, for community activities, and we were having an activity in the community talking about parent-child communication and sexual and reproductive health. And a grandmother came up and shared with us a story of a 16-year-old who was struggling with a young baby that she had given birth to, and a neighbor had actually had made her pregnant and had infected her with HIV/AIDS. And this man was still in the community on the loose. No one was doing anything to him. And so because we had come to talk about procedures for reporting and the institutional structures and how people can be supported, we had a representative of the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development from the family unit. So the community came out to tell us about this case, but this man who had made this girl pregnant and even infected her with HIV/AIDS was still in the community and moving on with his day-to-day life. And so the media that we had captured this story. So teenage mothers and young people really going back to school, going back to the community after school closures revealed a lot of community weaknesses in the protection of young people. So in Uganda, we kept on saying, open schools, our children are dying, open schools. So an indicator that community systems are not at all prepared to protect the children. They are only safe when they are in school. So that is one example. But when we talk about school re-entry, when the government opened briefly for classes, some classes and colleges and universities, the teenage mothers who were returning to school were shunned by their peers for being bad influence. They are seen as bad influence. They were kicked out of school for being indisciplined. They were generally stigmatized by society, and most of them have been neglected by their own parents. So this is one condition. This is one special condition that these teenage mothers, these pregnant teenagers are faced by themselves. We are also engaged in another study where we have found increased pregnancy in higher institutions of learning. So pregnancy is not only affecting young people, the teenagers, is also affecting girls across board, school-going girls across board. So we have found increased rate of teenage pregnancy in institution of higher learning, and pregnant and parenting students in these institutions are finding a lot of difficulty in continuing to perform very well, because the conditions previously, when there were fewer, because these institutions allow pregnant girls or married girls to be in school on the condition that they can stay outside the college. But with the opening of schools and COVID-19 standard operating procedures, interacting with the outside community puts the other students at risk. So colleges preferred that these students stay in college, but there was no preparation for these colleges for the students to be in college. So they set up makeshift structures where these girls who are having babies stayed. And so their children were suffering and themselves were suffering. And at the same time, they have to cope with their education and finish their studies. So that is the threats that we have when it comes to opening of schools and not being prepared for the increased pregnancy.
Viola, you will have to end your presentation.
Next,
you have to round up. You have to round up now.
Yeah, and what do we do and what is the way forward? We need to make communities safe for young people through establishing strengthening legal and social structures to protect adolescents from exploitation and harm. And we have administrative structures that can do that. And then we have an opportunity to promote community-based parenting and sexuality education. We need to bring back teachers and students to school. And how do we do it? We can do it through tracking systems to locate these students where they are and the barriers that have stopped them from returning school. While I will be at NAI, I will focus on establishing how to establish alternative learning environments, looking at teenage pregnancy and parenting as a special need. So to be able to investigate and look into teenage pregnancy as a special need and provide guidelines and recommendations that look at them. And lastly, we need to attend to important issues such as mental health, sexuality education, and school closure. If it happens again in any pandemic, it should be evidence-based and it should be the last resort, because we have seen closing schools out of crisis and if they could be provided for differently, causes more harm than good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Viola. So I will encourage the participants to type their questions in the Q&A function. In the meantime, I will ask a question. I was a little bit curious about the potential solutions. You were saying that the community is rather weak, and it's not really in terms of the establishment of protection structures. So I wonder, if the community for protection is weak, how can solutions be based on these structures work, or what needs? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, communities are weak because they are not prepared. And they are not aware of the resources that they have. So they would rather have it away because they don't know how to do it. And that's why when the children were struggling and there was a crisis for teenage pregnancy, they called on to let the schools open again. So they don't have the solutions themselves, but bringing back the debate to the communities to look and reflect on how to rebuild and provide for the resources is that we come back to create the reality within the community, because the communities cannot continue being unsafe for the children because it is not sustainable at all. So coming back, I have experience of working with communities on tough questions, and they have realized that the solutions are actually with them. So we cannot take it away from the community. Instead, we have to take it back from the community. In any case, the protection is lacking in the community. It is not only, but of course we had issues with schools, and we have gender-based violence in schools, but the community has shown that they need to come up, and there's need for a balance. So we can't still run away from the community. It's not that it is all done completely and we can do nothing with the community. Moreover, the culture, the norms that are abusive and protective are with the community. So the change has to go back to where the crisis is and the difficulties are.
Okay, there is a question here which exactly follows from what you were saying. There's one who is asking, could culture in any way play a role in breaking taboos and move things forward? And the participant elaborates that by culture, she means theater, storytelling, music, etc. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, culture has a role to play. And rethinking a culture, because what does culture mean? That's what I started with by looking at social order and looking at what the community looks as order and refining it and defining the roles. So culture has a role to play. We have a good rich culture that goes through play, music, and orientation into rethinking what we believe in. And so I agree with that culture has a role to play, but which culture? Of course, we cannot keep the culture that says that girls we blame the pregnancy on the girls. We cannot keep the culture that looks at girls as property. And of course you have to guard the girls as long as they'll be married off, as long as you get the right bride wealth, as long as they will be good mothers, and they must keep there and at whatever cost. So we have to define what we mean by culture, and of course, as a sociologist, I know that culture is not static. It's only static when you allow it to be the way it is. So it is about engaging communities to change and to rethink.
Yes, thank you very much, Viola. That will have to be the last word from you, and I would like to thank all our presenters for very inspiring and very enlightening talks. This is just one start of this debate, which needs to be continued, of course, beyond this webinar. I believe that there is a recognition of how the pandemic has impacted women and girls, also kind of in development circles. I remember that recently I had the opportunity to interview the former UN Women executive director, and she definitely recognized the negative impact and actually stated that with this development, with the pandemic, we were not really on track. So it has really exacerbated existing inequalities. But thank you for highlighting this, and I hope that you will all have a good Women's International Day onwards. Thank you very much also to all the participants and for all their really great questions. Have a nice day.